Welcome back to the Shepherd's Heart. Today we're going to talk about, well, you told me to use this thing. So instead of giving a title, I'll give a story, an experience. You drop by at a restaurant. You don't like the service, so you don't go back. You find a new restaurant. If the waitress is no good, you don't leave a tip. Maybe you find a restaurant, you really like it, but you've tried everything on the menu. So you find a new restaurant. It's exactly what we've seen as pastors with churches. Mm-hmm. People come to a church as if they're a consumer. And they'll check it out. Bathrooms aren't clean, they'll complain. Let me talk to the manager. Things aren't right around here. Throwaway manager for pastor, tipping for tithing, and you got the whole thing. You think I'm exaggerating, guys?
No, that's kind of the way, unfortunately, it is. We got the whole American mentality, and so we take that mentality wherever we go, including into the church. So a lot of times when people are looking for a church, they've got a certain thing that they're looking for. I think they're looking for very, very good leadership. They're looking for people that are able to minister to their youth, to their young. They've got good teaching. They got good ministry and worship and all this. But in all of this that they're looking for, a lot of them are not really looking to serve or to become really servants in that community, but they're looking for somewhere where they can go, and they really have no responsibility. They really have no strong attachments, and that's really not what the church is about. The church is supposed to be a family. It's supposed to be something different.
Looking for a place to serve. Yeah. Wow, what a concept. I'm going to go to your church if all of my felt needs are met. Yeah. And I say felt needs, not needs, because those are two different things. I can't even imagine how big our congregations would be if the people who came stayed. And I don't mean the people who come once or twice to check it out. I mean the people who come, they stay for months, even a couple of years. Yeah. And then, for whatever reason, they get the bug. It's not because of some doctrinal issue. It's not because of immorality. It's not because of anything serious at all. They just wander off to something else.
Yeah. Our consumer culture has certainly made this possible. Gone are the days when there was one church in the center of town and people walked there. Back in Pennsylvania, I've driven through many towns where it was clear that the town was centered around the church. People walked there. Today, everyone's got 2 or 3 cars in the driveway, and it's easy to drive by 5 churches to get to one that you think you may prefer. And so when you have that ability, it's not a surprise that in this consumer-oriented society, consumer mentality even takes over the believer. And of course, it's completely different from what the scriptures portray as the New Testament community, but it's a reality. And even if you're doing things right in your local church, you still are going to run up against this.
And sometimes it hurts. It feels like a betrayal. I'm thinking of one family in particular who, a couple of them were going through some serious medical issues. And we labored in prayer for them, and we were constantly in touch with them. We really cared for their well-being. And, shortly after this, they're just, okay, we're going now. Nothing personal. We're not mad at anybody. It's just like a dagger in the heart. And then to add insult to injury, a couple weeks after that, oh, my daughter just got engaged. Well, when do you guys do the wedding? No.
So again, the whole idea that we're there to get something, but we're not there to give something.
Yeah.
And really, there's no real commitment. There's no real attachment to the work or to Christ himself. And so that's something that is very difficult because in our culture, we are having a problem with commitment. If we look at people, they're waiting longer to get married. Many of them are deciding not to get married. And really, marriage is about making a covenant commitment with an individual. And so when we come into the church, we need to make a covenant relationship with the people. That includes the pastor, the leadership, and the people. But again, this idea and concept of that I am in covenant with you and that I have responsibilities towards you as you have responsibilities towards me, that is something that is kind of flying out the window, and people don't have that concept. It's very easy to call one another brother at the church. Hey, brother. But if you call somebody a brother, there's a big commitment that goes with calling somebody a brother.
My goodness.
And it's
Are
very
we
important.
really family?
Exactly. So it's very important to bring that out from time to time. That hey, if you're going to call somebody brother, you better think it through. What does that mean? because we're not to be a brother like Cain was a brother at the table.
Right?
No,
There's
we're
brothers and there's brothers, huh?
exactly.
So we know it's this whole consumer culture, there's lack of commitment, this self-centeredness. But what specific excuses have you heard when people say they're going to leave your church or a given church?
You know, oftentimes people in a difficult situation, a difficult life situation, imagine that they want the pastor or in a Messianic congregation, the rabbi, they want him to do and say certain things. But the spiritual leader, in looking over the situation, realizes, hey, they've got a different need here. They're ignoring the problem that took them down into this trouble area. All they want you to do is throw some sugar on it and be kind and gentle. But you're looking at the difficulty that they've just gotten themselves into, that they want you to get them out of now. And you know that you can put a patch on this immediate problem for the time being. But if you don't clean out the wound, if you don't clean out the problem, they're going to be on the phone with you 6 months later. And so sometimes as a spiritual leader, as an elder, as a pastor, you need to say things to people that they may not want to hear. And it is easier to kind of skip over it and to simply go for sprinkling some sugar on it and saying some kind words. But you know, that's not really New Testament pastoral ministry.
So you're saying they leave because they're being ministered to in a serious way and they don't like it.
Right. Because they've gotten used to ignoring the real issue. And when you look at the situation, you're scoping out the situation, and as an outsider, you're putting a new set of eyes on it, and you realize they've got to deal with this other issue first, or the problem that immediately is concerning them is going to keep recurring. Yeah. And so it's a difficult thing, but it really is a New Testament pastoral responsibility to lovingly say, you know, we need to kind of discuss this, because if we don't, this is going to keep happening.
So again, there's not a correct, there's a misconception about what the church is, what it's about, what it's supposed to do, what this relationship is not really defined correctly. So in the example that Mottel is talking about, again, there's not the correct conception. The pastor in a church, in a sense, is like a coach. And anytime you get a coach, it is the responsibility of the coach to look at your strengths and to look at your weaknesses. And it is his responsibility to encourage you in your strengths, and it's his responsibility to help you overcome your weaknesses. And so there's people that pay coaches really to give them, you know, a hard time. They pay coaches literally in order to put them to do a lot of work, a lot of discipline that they're not going to do themselves. And we're talking, they might pay them thousands of dollars if they're going to go to the Olympics or do something.
They push you, they yell at you.
Exactly, all that kind of stuff. And so when you go to a church, the pastor and those that are in leadership are like coaches. And the Bible does call us to be converted. Converted from what? From a lifestyle, from a form of living that is not godly, not pleasing to God, and will not bring the fruit of God's blessing into our lives. So we need to stop doing that, and we need to begin to do this. And for that, we need a coach to come alongside of us.
You think some people will leave a church, and that's their reason, but they'll say it's another reason?
Oh, my goodness. That happens all the time. Because if you know that there's a real problem either in your life or in the life of your family, and the pastor has put his finger on that, and all of a sudden you just want to get out from under that, you're looking for a clean getaway. You're looking to not besmirch your reputation among those folks, so you're going to come up with a different reason. Now, both you and the pastor knows the reason that you have left, because you did not want to deal with a recurring issue of sin or a recurring problem. But certainly you're going to look to have our schedule changed, or the kids are now involved in this sports club, and the later service at this other church will allow them to participate. And again, in the evangelical world, where you can go to certain communities, and every 5 or 6 blocks, every mile or so, there may be actually a half decent evangelical church.
Yeah.
And so it facilitates that. It feeds that sort of thing. It enables that dysfunction. And this brings up, I don't know if you want to go into this, but this brings up an entirely important area. When a new family comes into your congregation and you are a spiritual leader, it is incumbent to ask them, where have you been before?
Where are you from and why are you here? Why did you leave Church X to come to our Church Y?
And that's a difficult thing to do because you may be so happy that they're there, particularly if you're struggling.
Right.
A new family comes in, it's an intact family, they're driving a decent-looking car, they look like they'd be a good addition to the church family. You may not want to, to dig too deeply. Well, I understand that you don't want to do that, but you're just kicking the can.
Better now than later.
Better now than later.
Yeah.
You're just kicking the can down the road. So if you don't realize the reason that they left Church X is because of a serious problem with them, and you take them in, and they've got these talents, and they start to get involved, and then he gets on the board of trustees. 2 years down the road, all of a sudden that problem resurfaces.
Yeah.
But now he's on the board of trustees.
Yeah.
And you start to think, let me call Pastor so-and-so from their former church. And he gives you the lowdown, and you say, oh, that's exactly what they've done here.
Yeah. There are, it's hard. That case in point. If you pastor a small church, it's much easier to be involved when new people come in.
That's right.
The bigger the church is, the more structure you need to deal with stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they've come from a big church, there's a good chance nobody knows them anyway.
Yes.
One of the excuses I've heard from people who've left my congregation and have come from other congregations and left theirs, and they couch it in different words, but it comes down to this: the pastor's not available enough. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to some people, and I don't know if these were the ones that were mad at me or the ones mad at the other pastor, said, let me give you an example. You know how many people are at that church. Let's say there's 300 people at that church. If he greets everybody in the morning for 30 seconds, it's 150 minutes. It's over 2 hours. And they look at me like this. I never thought of that. No, you didn't. You just got mad and left.
Mm-hmm.
The pastor is a nice person, godly person, runs an organization, teaches the word, visits people, prays with people, marries people, buries people.
Has a wife, has a girl, has a daughter, has a son, has grandchildren.
But everyone, the selfish people, everyone,
Yeah.
they got to be their best friend too, and have to say hi to them every morning. And they just I don't know what to call it, too self-oriented, too self-centered. And so you take that morning greeting to 150 minutes. That's only 300 people. If you got 500 people, if you have 1,000 people, what if one person needs counseling for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Now take that to visitation. Well, pastor hasn't been over to my house. Well, if I visit everybody's house, I'll visit you once every 2 years. At a medium-sized church.
Right.
At a small church, it might be I'll visit you once every 60 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
60 families.
And that's why they got to understand that this is a teamwork, and they got to be able to accept someone else besides the pastor visiting them.
That's right.
And so that's something that we need to ingrain in the congregation, that we are a pastoral team, and that we're working as a team, and that the leaders that we place over them are capable of handling the majority of problems or situations they're going to have. And for them to have confidence that if that individual thinks that he is not capable, then he will come to the pastor or someone else, and then we will get involved. But a lot of people can never get over the fact that they can't deal one-to-one with the pastor. And in a sense, to me, that presents a problem where they are trying to identify the pastor as though he was Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And the pastor and Jesus Christ are two very different things. And so a pastor cannot be everything to everyone. Jesus Christ is everything to
Only
everyone.
one of them's omnipresent, and only one of them walked on water.
Exactly. So again, they've got to get over that. They got to get over that and understand that the same spirit that is operating in the pastor is now operating in these leaders also. And we can see that in the case of Moses when he raised up the 70. God told him, I will take the spirit that is in you and I will place it in them. So they've got to be taught to have the confidence that that is, in fact, what God is able to do. And so if they can do that, then they can really grab a hold of the vision and grow in the vision. But again, I think that we as pastors have a great responsibility always to define what is these relationships, what are these responsibilities, what are these privileges, so that the enemy will not go into their mind and begin to mess with them.
And I think one of the issues is most congregations, at least traditionally, have started out small and they grow. I mean, now big churches plant big churches. They send 500 people to start a new church. It's already big. But you start as a small congregation with 3-4 families, and you're used to that intimacy and that fellowship, and you're always there for one another. Then you're 10 families, 15 families, 20 families. Now people are starting to feel ignored. 30 families, 40 families. It's not the church that it used to be.
Yeah.
And you go from this small family intimate group where everybody knows everybody can't make the transition. And some people will try to hold the church back, or try to hold the pastor back because they want to retain what they had.
Yes.
They don't want to lose that intimacy. And so I think there's a growth platform that congregations hit, and that's one of the issues that have to be dealt with.
And that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons we employ like small cell groups. The point of small cell groups is that the point is that we got the large celebration, the large meeting where everybody's at, but then we've got a small group where you can know everybody there by name. You can know their birthday. You can know their anniversary. Because like when you were saying, when we're in the small church, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday and so-and-so's anniversary and all this kind of stuff. And then we had time, hey, you want to witness something? Yeah, let me witness this. But as we were growing, I kept telling the church, there's coming a day where we're not going to be able to do that anymore. I'm not going to be calling out birthdays and anniversaries from the pulpit, because if I do, we would not do anything else. And so they understood that. Barely this past week, somebody asked me, well, we'd like to sing a song for a birthday. And I said, well, we can't do that, because if we do that, then everybody's going to want me to do that, and there's not going to be any end to that.
And some people understand, and some people get offended and leave.
Exactly.
It happens. I've seen it.
We saw in the small groups that we established for a while in our Messianic congregation that they actually were pretty effective in ministering to some of these needs. There was a genuine sense of community, and oftentimes when there was a physical need, people would pick up the phone and call people in their home group, in their small group first. Because
it's a beautiful thing.
Oftentimes there was a geographical area. Most of the home groups were predicated on the idea of people who lived relatively close to one another. So I could hop in my car and be at someone's house in 12 or 15 minutes. But it really is the pattern that Moses established when he tried to see everyone all day, and finally they came to him and they said, no, if you continue to do this, you will wear yourself out. Appoint ones over 100, more ones over 10, and all these various formulas that they had for leadership. And it really is the only thing that will work once you get past a certain size.
I remember us transitioning, and it was such a beautiful thing when my phone stopped ringing. And the people whose phones do ring now, they love it, because to them it's not overwhelming. They're sharing the love and the gifts that they have. We are supposed to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, not do the ministry for the saints. It's a big difference. All right, so what would you say to someone who's thinking about leaving his or her church?
I would ask them very frankly, what change was there in you or your family that maybe contributed to this? Because oftentimes people will say, well, I want to leave because Pastor so-and-so did this, or Pastor so-and-so didn't do that. All the while, there may have been something that was going on within them or within their family that was actually the far more important thing. So they're looking to try to grab hold of some external reason to take the focus off of them. Oftentimes, it's an internal issue. And so people need to simply be honest with themselves. You know, there's something else that we need to put out there. Not every congregation is going to be the best fit for every person. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very grateful that there are various possibilities. People have different preferences in music, in all these sorts of things. Last evening we were at Pastor Humberto's church, and there are many people who respond to worship, and that sort of church is going to be the best fit for them. That they can lift up their souls to the Lord, and it's going to be a very effective sort of thing. Others may have a different cultural orientation or cultural preference. So sometimes a person can come into the church, be there a few months, and recognize, I'm kind of in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Love the folks, love the fact that they're all believers, but I just don't feel a soul liberty in the main worship service. I feel as though all these other factors are always needling me. And in that instance, it's best to simply, honestly, go to the pastor and share these things. I believe a wise pastor will recognize that there are times when that's going to be a valid concern. And in that instance, he would say, well, let me recommend 2 or 3 other churches that, have a different style, but you want to go to a congregation where the doctrine is sound, but where there some of these other things may be a better fit.
Have either of you initiated that conversation? Going up to somebody and saying, you know what? This may not be the congregation for you.
No, I've never initiated it, but in hearing concerns, I've said to people after they've started attending a couple of months, I said, well, if this is, even after we've discussed these things and you remain firm in feeling that this is your need, I have told someone that there's a church I can recommend to you that's going to go along that line a little bit better. And so I've done it in response.
How about you, Humberto?
In my teaching, I go in certain times where I will literally tell the people, again, this is who we are as a church. This is what we do. This is the vision we have. This is the way we're headed. If you cannot find yourself within that, then you need to look elsewhere.
So on a broader picture to the whole group.
Let them know that, and again, that would be better for them than to stay there. One of the things that the Lord showed me is when I began ministry is that there is a time when some people need to go, and what the Lord was telling me is when they need to go, you need to let them go.
Yeah.
There's no use in making a big issue about it. If they're ready to go, we've done everything we can to make sure, hey, is there any kind of bitterness, something that we need to forgive? Is there a problem? And if we've done all we can, then we need to be able to release them and let them go where.
I heard a true story. I'll never forget it. It's humorous but effective. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the CEO of, I'll say Southwest Airlines, though I don't remember which one it was. Mm-hmm. And one of their core values was humor. It's part of their company culture. Okay. It's in writing. And so one day, the office gets a letter from a customer, something like this. I was on your flight from such and such to such a place, and the flight attendant was talking about the safety standards. Do this, here's your seatbelt. And they were cracking jokes the whole time.
Yes.
And I was offended because this is a serious matter and people shouldn't be joking. And this was the response corporate office sent back. We'll miss you. They weren't willing to compromise their core value to accommodate an upset customer.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I brought that back to my staff, and I said, sometimes we just need to tell people in our congregation, we'll miss you. We won't change everything or maybe even nothing to please you. Yeah. If you're unhappy here, we'll miss you.
Because that's the reality. Every congregation has a certain character, has a certain spirit, and it has a certain way of doing things. Now, one way is not necessarily better than the other. The thing is that they all have to work according to the conviction, according to the gifting, and according to the people that are there. So once the church is going in that manner, it's not going to be changed very easily. It's going to continue in that way. And so when you enter into that church, you need to find your place inside within the context of that vision and what God is doing there.
I've found myself on multiple occasions having and wanting to stick up for other pastors in other churches.
Sure. Yeah.
They'll come to my congregation, and like Mottel suggested, you want to know why they're there, and I almost always ask. It's not formal, but it's informal. What brings you our way? Where did you used to go? You know, and that helps me know who I've got and what I've got. You know, if they were from the First Southern Baptist Church and they've been there for 10 years, I know where they're at doctrinally.
Yeah.
If they're from the First Cosmic Christ and they've been there for 10 years, I know where they are doctrinally. So I'll ask them where they're from, and if they start to say anything negative about the church that I know or the pastor I know, I'll just cut them off. I say, you know what? That's a great man. I love that church. That's it. If I wasn't going to this church, I'd be going to that church. I've said that many times. I said, yeah, that's a good congregation. I got a great relationship with them. And I want them to know right off the bat, how I feel, and that in a gentle way, I'm shutting them down.
Right.
And I'm discrediting their pending complaint.
Of course, this is a different subject, but of course it points out the fact, we're talking about transfer, people transferring in, transferring out, people church hopping, but it points out how much better is it to have a person come into your congregation unsaved, who is not yet a believer in Messiah Jesus. They're faced with their sin, their need, they're faced with the love of God. They come to saving faith, and they can be discipled, hopefully, the right way from the beginning.
And ultimately, that's the best, again, people that we need to seek for,
Yes.
We need to seek that one. Why? Because we'll be involved in forming that individual according to the vision, according to the custom of the church. And so that will be a spiritual son and daughter that will grow the best. And a lot of times, we as pastors might be very happy to receive somebody from somewhere else, but eventually we will run into a lot of problems. But if we begin them this way, which costs us more, but yet this will be the best result. Exactly.
That's right.
I
It's
agree
more
with you.
long-range thinking, isn't it?
Yes.
That's right.
Absolutely.
I did a sermon called Church Shopping and Hopping, Why It's Important to Join a Church. And in it I gave a lot of Bible verses. There are actually a whole movement of people who don't think church membership is biblical. And though that word membership isn't biblical, the concept
Fully
is
biblical.
the only biblical concept.
That's right. That's the New Testament paradigm.
Yes. And so I'd encourage you, if you want some good Bible teaching on the topic of joining and staying at a church, to visit our website and request that sermon. This is The Shepherd's Heart. We've got a lot more to share with you, and we're going to do so, God willing, on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
GLC invites you to visit us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/GLCTV. Here you can stay in touch with all of the latest GLC news, along with daily scriptural inspirations, current specials in our bookstore, links to our newest shows, and online media, plus articles from trusted sources. Feel free to drop us a message or a question by posting to our page. Please help us out and like our page by clicking on the thumbs up button. Don't delay, drop by the GLC Facebook page at facebook.com/GLCTV. We want to interact with you today.
Welcome back to The Shepherd's Heart. On this side of the break, we're going to talk about a very difficult topic. Maybe not so much for you, but it'll help you understand the shepherd's heart.
Yes.
Because pastors have unique difficulties, experiences that other people don't have because of ministry. So I've got some statistics here. Now, on previous episodes, we've given out some statistics, and Mottel has pointed out that a lot of these statistics are for churchianity, not necessarily evangelical or Bible born-again believers. So we'll take that as a likelihood. And the statistic is not as important to me as the problem that the statistic addresses. So I'll give the statistic nevertheless, but then we're going to talk about the issues surrounding the statistic. So here's the first one. 33% state that being in the ministry is an outright hazard to their family. There are ministries, there are pastors whose families suffer from being in ministry. What's this? PK. Come on, tell me what I just said.
Pastor's kid.
Right, why do we have this abbreviation, and what comes with it?
Baggage.
Yeah, baggage.
Flip that around. 33% feel that being in ministry is a hazard to their family. That means that 66%, 67% feel that it's not a hazard to their family. I have seen, in my own personal experience with men that I know in ministry, that sometimes it is very much a hazard to the family. But one thing that needs to be kept in mind is oftentimes we tend to focus on the worst situations, on the horror stories.
Yeah.
I don't want to give people the wrong idea. People need to understand that there are many pastoral families who are deeply thankful to the Lord for putting them in that situation.
Yes.
There are pastoral families who, at a certain point, realize that God has uniquely gifted them to serve the congregational family.
Well, all your children are in ministry, aren't they, Humberto?
Yes, all my children are involved in ministry. You mentioned in PK, both of my girls went to Christ for the Nations. And one of them, I remember telling me very clearly, their friends were surprised to find out that they were PKs.
Because they were so well balanced. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
So apparently, again, this is an issue that in the PKs that they had met, there was something that was different and distinct than my daughters. And so again, I think it's when they grow up in the church culture, and I think one of two extremes happens. One of the extremes is that the people put an expectation upon the children that is not really correct. An expectation that they
should be better than everybody else's children.
Everybody else's kid. They should behave better. They should be more spiritual. They should talk. They should, just something that is overboard. The other extreme is when they cover up for the children of the pastor. I think a lot of times this is what causes them to be, very rebellious, because he's the pastor's a kid, and so they say, shh, you can't say anything. Shh, you got to be quiet. It's the pastor's boy. So both of these extremes are very bad for the life of the children. And so in my personal walk, I actually went through and taught the congregation that I did not want any of these extremes, that my children would to be like their children, that we would know that they would have failings, that they would sometimes misbehave or whatever. And so they needed to treat them like any other kid in the church. So this is something that we taught them, that we showed them to fight against that effect.
Here's one of the things that troubles me. Haven't seen it in my own family, thank God. But could tomorrow, so I don't want to say, I'm above anything. But sometimes, pastors' kids will have problems like other people's kids will have problems. There's a passage in the scripture that says an elder's family should be well-behaved and in order.
Yes.
And so if something goes south, there's those people in the congregation who can't wait to jump on your family and maybe even say you're no longer fit to be a pastor because your children are misbehaving or stepping away from the faith. What do you think about that?
It's a reality, and you can't ignore it. I think the healthy thing to do is not to sweep things under the rug, but as Pastor Humberto said, is to put it in front of the people and say, this is an average kid. He's not super kid. He's not super pastor.
Mine are, just saying.
With the exception of Steve's 4 wonderful children.
Right.
But it really is the grounds for resentment if the child is given the idea that they have to prop up their parents. My son was always understood that he can fly under the radar with all the other kids, simply because I was the leader of a Messianic congregation. It doesn't mean that he's going to start to answer Bible questions. He was able to, usually more than the other kids, but that's not his job description in life. His job description is to grow up in a healthy sort of way. We tried to take that burden off him as much as we could. Nevertheless, sometimes they'll put it on themselves, because once they get to a certain age, all of a sudden they look around, they realize that their behavior is going to influence how people see their father. But we need to be proactive, just as Pastor Humberto did, in saying to the people, let's cut some slack for our kids. Let's give them a little bit of leeway and allow them to a healthy congregational relationship. And I really think that's the best way to go. Don't expect, if you're out there, don't expect your pastor's kids to be junior pastor. It's not going to happen.
Something very similar happens with spouses. Now, I've been at my congregation for 25 years, so for personal experience, we're going to have to go way back. But I've heard it from others, this concept. You're candidating for a church. and they say, what does your wife do? In other words, they want to hire 2 pastors
Right.
for the price of 1. Will your wife be teaching Sunday school? Will your wife be in the praise band? Will your wife run the nursery? Wait a minute. You know, my wife is just a congregant like everybody else.
Yeah.
She happens to be a godly woman and happy to serve,
Yeah.
but we're not putting any extra pressure
Yeah.
on my wife, just like we're not putting any extra pressure on my children. I think these are the hazards to ministers' families.
Yeah, it can become a real issue and problem when people have a concept about what a pastor's wife is, does, dresses, behaves,
Yeah.
sits, and all of this kind of business. And so again, that's where a pastor has to instruct the congregation that that's not the way it is. Again, in my case, my wife was going to serve according to her gifting, according to the leading of the Spirit upon her life, according to the passion that she felt, and her passion has been children. So all of the kids in the church have been raised in one way or another under her ministry, under her authority, and so they love her like mom, and
That's
they
awesome.
come around her all the time.
Yeah.
It's mom. And so, but this is something not because we demanded, we said that's where you got to be. No, my wife usually does not sit next to me in service. She's always doing something. People say, well, there she is. And again, but this is the way that she feels good, free, fulfilling, and that's what we want.
I have, as you both know, 2 congregations, which results to 2 services, 2 major services, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. My wife has chosen Saturday. That's the one she's always been a part of. That's the one she is. So she's rarely there on a Sunday. The Sunday is an entirely different congregation. So we joke sometimes. Is Steve really married? Does Steve have a wife? No pressure for her to be there so that everybody can see she's there.
Exactly.
Similarly, my wife is a career woman. She's a mother. When families in the church want to invite us over for dinner, I almost always say, that's very nice of you, thank you. But I'd be happy to meet with you. But my wife has her own life. She can't come to everything I come to. This is my ministry and my career. She works very hard with the family and with her own career. Some people, at first it was quite difficult. There was always somebody upset.
Yeah.
Now people know. Sometimes there are visitors, and I suppose they're visitors from small churches because with big churches they don't expect that.
Yeah.
But with small churches, you could see the look in their eye. Why won't she come? And I'll try to explain to them very nicely. You know, she's got a life, she's got her own things doing. But if you want to meet, I'm happy to meet with you. So I think protecting our children, protecting our spouses is extremely important. Even if it's difficult, there's pressure.
Sure.
And I think if we did that, there would be fewer problems, and more of the spouses wouldn't be so hurt with their husband's ministry. Because this next statistic says 80% of spouses wish their spouses would choose a different profession. Spouses. I guess they're afraid to say men and women.
Yes.
Even though everybody thinks everything's egalitarian and women are pastors too, well, still there's only a small fraction of them that are.
Yeah,
Even,
sure.
you know. So 80% of pastor spouses wish their spouses would choose a different profession. So let's just say it's not 80%. I'm sure there's still many that do.
Yeah.
I think because of the pressures I mentioned in part.
Yeah.
Can you think of any other things on that topic?
You know, I think that oftentimes if a young wife does not have a realistic idea of what pastoral ministry is, but her husband is all gung-ho, they're getting out of seminary, she loves him, he's you know, her dream husband, so she's going to go with him. It's his calling. She may be totally unprepared for the level of sacrifice and the level of scrutiny that comes with the pastoral office. I almost think it's incumbent then upon either denominations or associations, especially with a young couple, to kind of give them a wake-up call as to what this is all about. Because while if they were raised in the church, they do have an idea. I've seen instances where you had a girl who may have gotten saved in her late teens. She goes off to Bible college. All of a sudden, at age 24, she's the pastor's wife. And all of these pressures are coming upon her. She may have a very unrealistic expectation. Now, I heard very clearly what you said, Steve, about your wife having a career and having additional responsibilities in the home. Now, recognize, though, that there are other wives who do see that differently in ministry. They really do feel as though they are pastor part B, and they can't imagine, neither can their husbands imagine, ministry in the church without the wife.
Oh, and I'm fully supportive of that. In fact, in our family, we've had both experiences. Because when we were young, my wife wasn't in a separate career. She helped me start the congregation. We did everything together. So I think that's valid, and I think both spouses can definitely be called.
Yes.
From my perspective, there's three possibilities. Both spouses are called to the ministry. One spouse is called to the ministry, the husband, and the wife's calling is to support her husband, and she loves that calling as a spouse. And the third is, he better not enter ministry, because she can't handle it, and it's going to destroy their marriage.
Yeah, eventually, I think one of the things that as pastors we've got to recognize is that we in a certain sense, have to have a license from our children and from our wife to really do a successful ministry. That is to say, you really have to have their okay. You really have to have their willingness to participate and to release you into that, because in one way or another, they're going to be involved in what you're doing. And so I think as pastors, we got to have that ability to recognize again that we need to have their okay in what we're doing. They need to be on board with what we're going to do. So I always tell pastors one thing: never do more than your family will allow you to do.
That brings 1 Corinthians 7 to mind. Are you married? Do not seek a divorce. Are you unmarried? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life. And I want to spare you this. So I guess that wouldn't be any more applicable than to ministry. Yeah. And I think you're right. You know, there was a fairly large church in Tucson that was calling a new pastor. And this is somebody I knew, so, you know, he shared things with me. And he said he brought his family first. And he wanted his wife and children to say yes or no.
Right.
Right.
Especially, he said, because his children were in high school. And it's a very critical time.
Sure.
And he said, I will not uproot my children and bring them to another place unless they're for it.
Exactly. When I met my wife, one of the things that I was it was very important for me is to let her know where I was going. When I met her, I was about to graduate from college as an electronics engineering major. So I needed her to know that I felt that I had a calling for something else, and that sooner or later that was going to come upon my life. And when it did, whatever life we had or whatever expectations out of this we had, we were going to have to put that aside, and we're going to go do something else. And so I was very sure before we got married that I sat down with her and told her, this is going to happen one day in the future.
I was taken by surprise. I had never intended to be a pastor, and my wife had therefore never expected to be a pastor's wife. We were actually going to move near Mottel and kind of team up with Mottel and his wife to do ministry in the greater New York area. That's how far back we go. But God had other plans, and we ended up going into ministry. So it was nice that you had the opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
For us, it was a little different. 25 years later, here we are.
So they're just things that as a pastor, you know, we really need to be cognizant of. And again, it's good for us to be able to minister certain things. I do work with younger pastors, and when I do offer them certain advice. For example, there's certain pastors that have very good notions, very good feelings about something, but there's really lacking of wisdom in it. For example, there's some young pastors that want to use a very much open door policy to their home, to their family life, to every member of the church, because we're just one big family.
You mean like, come knock on my door anytime?
Whenever you want, my door is always open, and you know, we just one big family. I mean, it sounds very good. It sounds very theoretically, I mean, it's so wonderful, but in effect, it can be very dangerous to your marriage, and it can be very dangerous to your children. And so you've got to be very careful about these concepts that appear very Christ-like, appear very good, but they're lacking wisdom.
Okay, how can they be dangerous? And I'm not asking for my benefit. I'm asking for our audience's benefit, because they may not see it from a pastor's perspective.
There are certain just things that happen in life. If you have an open door policy, there can come a certain individual with certain weakness, and certain things can happen to your home, to your family. We have ministered with people in Mexico, for example, and these people are working with drug addicts, they're working with alcoholics, they're raising the ministry themselves by working all day, and then they got the men, they're living in their home or next to their home, and it's just very wonderful how great love, but then one of these guys will come and abuse their little girl or something.
Right.
And so the concept is very good, a lot of love and a lot of, but it's a very dangerous situation and proposition.
And in addition to those horrors, there's just the very practical side of, hey, I'm not dressed. My house isn't clean.
Exactly.
We're having a fight now. I'm rushing off to the dentist. Everybody's entitled to their space and their life and their privacy.
And you got to keep your family identity. I mean, it's fine that we have part of our identity is the brotherhood in the church, but yet every family has to have their own identity.
Yes.
And you see this in Israel. There were 12 tribes. There were one people, but there were 12 tribes, and they each had a distinctive flavor about them. And so this is the same way. The church is the family, but yet we have our own family, and we can't lose sight that we are that family also.
All right, here's another one. 80% of spouses feel left out and underappreciated by church members.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that happen in pastors' wives? Feeling underappreciated or left out?
I think that what happens is the average church member is simply and innocently unaware of just how much many pastors' wives are doing.
Mm-hmm.
It just simply, I know that in the case of my wife, when I served as senior pastor, she was doing many things for our congregation in our home. She was preparing things. She was doing clerical things because we have a Messianic congregation. She was doing a lot of the Hebrew translation. She was preparing lessons for the children. So if you didn't have a child in the Hebrew class, you were unaware that my wife was spending several hours a week preparing Hebrew lessons, and then later on she would do Skyping, giving lessons to some of the kids in the congregation in preparation for their bar or bat mitzvah. You may not have been aware because you're only aware of one section of what she does,
Right.
the section that affects you. Well, she is also ministering to other people in a different area. So underappreciated, yes, because so many people are only seeing a small part of what she does. And I think it's only her love for her husband and her love for the Lord that makes her grit her teeth and go forward.
Well, you're talking to a bunch of people right now.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them? How can they fix this in their own church?
Recognize that your pastor's wife has multiple roles to fill, and she may not be 100% in any one of those areas. She's got to, you've got to slice up your life a certain way. So how much should she give her husband? How much should she give her children? How much is she able to give to the congregation? So don't expect her to be always on call for you, because she has to be on call for her husband, for her children, for her own concerns.
Yeah.
You know what else I think would be helpful? Pastors, they have Pastor Appreciation Day.
No.
It should be Pastor and Wife Appreciation Day.
We usually did that in our congregation. And even in the churches where I served as an elder of sorts, it was always pastor and wife. We never singled out. Every one of us was smart enough to recognize that he could not have done what he was doing had it not been for the support of his wife.
And then perhaps ongoing, I often get letters and cards and emails thanking me for my ministry.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice. I mean, those letters are wonderful. When you send those to your pastor, include your pastor's wife.
Yes.
And even, as Mottel says, you may not see her ministry, but you
Yes.
can guarantee he's not doing his work without her. She is propping him up. and encouraging him.
It would be impossible for a pastor really to have any type of effective ministry without the participation of his wife and his
Exactly.
family. If he has any kind of success, that foundation's got to be there. Otherwise, he would not have any kind of
So I
voice.
think it'd be very helpful if people expressed that, if they acknowledged that. If all the cards and letters were Mr. and Mrs. or Pastor and Mrs.
Absolutely.
If the awards and the plaques were Mr. and Mrs. and Pastor and Mrs.
Absolutely.
and so on and so forth. All right, so here's a question. Hopefully, we'll be able to wrap up with this one. What can a pastor and his family do to survive and thrive in ministry?
I think you've got to carve out personal space that says no admittance, that this is our personal space. That's why what Pastor Humberto said about the open door policy to the pastor's home, that's a bad idea. There really needs to be their private space. If you want to survive a full career and have a full career in ministry, there needs to be a confidence, especially among the children, that their every action is not going to be scrutinized. Sure, if you want to invite people into your home, I've often, as a visiting guest speaker, been to a meal in the pastor's home, and almost invariably there were other church members there as well, because I was the visiting speaker. Sometimes they'd have the chairman of the Board of Elders or the missions committee head, or people who were interested in the Jewish roots of the faith were invited. The kids understood, though, that for the next 2 hours, their home is open. But then once we leave, the door is closed. It really is their space. And so, folks who are members of congregations shouldn't impede upon that. If they value the pastor, they definitely won't impede upon that.
I've got to think there's a reason that parsonages aren't popular anymore.
Oh, my goodness. Well, for many reasons. Because I'm part of an association which has come to recognize the fact that many men would approach retirement age and they'd have barely any savings. And because of the unique structure of pastoral salary, a whole nother subject, many of them never were being paid into a pension plan. Some pastors, and this is not well known, some pastors have actually opted out of Social Security, which is a possibility early in your career. And so it is incumbent upon folks to recognize these sorts of unique situations for their pastor.
And even though you say pastoral salary is another question, topic altogether, and it is, I think a lot of spouses and even pastors, though, feel underappreciated because of their support package, because they're not being sufficiently paid.
There's an old saw that goes like this: Lord, you keep our pastor humble, we'll keep him poor.
Yeah, exactly.
And being poor does not necessarily go hand in hand with being holy. And that's a simple reality. In our world today, if you need to get around, you need to go. It's a very different thing from the old parson back in in the 1800s, where he just walked around the town to do his ministry. It's a very different situation today. The pastor needs to have a sense of full security. That's why we always made sure that we had a full medical insurance package for our pastor, and that we allowed him the ability to structure his pay package.
Yeah.
He was able to put a certain percentage into housing allowance, which is tax exempt, and a different portion into salary. He was able to move that line a little bit based on his personal need. You need to give a person a little bit of a sense of control over that aspect of their lives. If everything is dictated to them by a board, there almost invariably is going to be a dissatisfaction, a resentment, and a looking for the door, because they feel they have no control over their lives.
People use this concept of humility tied to salary, but they never want to apply that to themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not biblical. The only biblical portion is 1 Timothy 5. It says, the elders who direct the affairs of a congregation well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. So the only biblical guidance we have for salary is double. So if you really want to get specific, come up with a fair salary and double it. But why isn't it that people won't do that? Well, we don't want to overpay our pastor. How can you overpay a servant of God who loves you? Aren't you supposed to want as much for them like you would your children or your father? We're running out of time. I'm sufficiently paid, so I'm not like suddenly griping or anything.
And you're not angling for double your salary.
No, I'm not. I'm doing
Because
quite, I'm
other
doing
people
quite
see
well.
that verse as being double honor, not double, money in essence.
Yes,
Okay.
but they're mistaken. I suppose we could talk about that on another episode. But safely, we're out of time. We'll see you next time on The Shepherd's Heart.
This program was produced by and for God's Learning Channel. If you enjoyed this program, we need your support to help keep this program on GLC. Please make your checks out to God's Learning Channel, P.O. Box 61000, Midland, Texas 79711-1000. Please be sure to designate where your contribution is intended. It is very important to let GLC know which programs you enjoy and support.
Order your copy of this program from the GLC bookstore by calling the numbers or visiting the website on your screen. Please include the program number when ordering.